Hello and welcome to Buddha and the Coach vlog powered by Soul Performance Academy. I am your host, Dan Mickle. The Buddha and the Coach is a weekly vlog focused on the teachings of the Buddha in a coaching light. The Buddha and Coach is proud to be sponsored by It's Called Normal Athletics. ICN Athletics makes the extraordinary ordinary through adaptive beach volleyball. Everyone should have the opportunity to enjoy and excel at this sport, and ICN offers the programs and educations to make it normal for adaptive athletes to play on any court. Help them make the beach volleyball court a place for everybody. For more information or to make a donation to the 501c3, please visit icnathletics.com. Again, it's called Normal Athletics. I'd like to thank Dave and John for their continued support of the Buddha and the Coach vlog. All right, lesson 21. This week we are talking about resolutely chain yourself to attain peace. And this is kind of an interesting one for me because I personally sometimes have moments where I get so caught up in what I am training or what I'm working on and trying to help others that I don't really look at how it's affecting me or how my training reflects me. So focused on getting that result and helping, I don't realize that there's a lot of self-reflection that comes with that, or even a reflection that others see comes back to me. So I think what the Buddha is talking about here is that what goes around comes around, right? And if we want to be good teachers to others, we have to be good teachers to ourselves. And we have to kind of get rid of that old saying of do what I say, not what I do. And I think a lot of times we lose that as coaches. We get so caught up on trying to help other people get so much better that we end up going almost against what is natural for us and causes conflicts. A prime example is in the sporting world with punishments. We know scientifically, we can show all the studies that punishment is not a motivator. Perform poorly and run some laps, or miss this skill and do some push-ups doesn't really have a positive effect or even a lasting effect on athletes. But yet there's times that maybe we get frustrated and we're not getting the production that we need, so we just automatically resort to that. And that starts to go against us, right? If that's not our philosophy to begin with and we're doing it out of frustration, then it also causes that conflict with us. So not only are we now having the issue and the conflict with the team or the student, we're also having that conflict internally, and we kind of start to spiral there. So we have to make sure that we're following what we believe. And I know I harp on it a lot in all my other podcasts and social media posts about coaching philosophies, but that's where it comes down to. What is our coaching philosophies and what are our core values to follow? And I think a lot of times coaches jump into coaching for numerous reasons, but we see it a lot. Your kid's little league team doesn't have a coach, so you jump in and coach, which is awesome. But sometimes when we jump in it, we forget to really look at, well, why are we coaching? And then what does it mean? What are our values, and how do we define who we are as a coach? And I don't think we take the time to do that. So we're not resolutely training ourselves to attain peace, but yet we're trying to find that peace to give to others. We have to start with ourselves. We have to train ourselves in what we want. Another great example is when we talk about feedback. We talk about our players or people that we're working with not able to accept feedback, but how often do we work as coaches in giving feedback? How often do you train on actually presenting that? Again, we put a lot of onus on, hey, you need to learn to take feedback and learn to take this critique and not take it so personal, but yet we don't spend the time learning how to deliver that critique. And we get really frustrated when players take it incorrectly or get really upset. And again, this is coming straight from the heart. I've had this in very recent times where I would start to get frustrated because I feel like the players weren't taking what I said correctly. They were taking it to heart. We say that they were taking any critique as criticism. And I was getting really bummed out and even upset that that was happening. And then I realized that a lot of it's happening because I haven't worked on how to deliver that. It's easy for me to say, hey, don't take this as criticism, it's just a critique. But those are just words. We need to learn how to actually deliver it and work through. And I think that is part of the problem as well. We work so hard to be at the best at the X's and O's and the tactics of what our sport or what we're trying to train, but we don't take the time to think about how we're delivering it and actually train ourselves in how to educate. We talk about coaches as being educators, which I agree, and it's totally awesome. But how much do we actually spend on learning how to educate? How much time have you spent as a coach on an offense or defense or a play versus how to deliver that message or how to get the most out of your players in those moments? I'm sure that ratio is much higher towards the X's and O's than it is for the educational component. But yet everything we do is based on that educational component. And I think for me, the switch and when I've started to have the most success, and I'm not talking about wins and losses success, I'm talking about growth of players, growth of teams, growth of program, is when I started to focus the same, if not more, on the educational aspect of how I am a coach. How am I delivering this? How am I getting through? And less on the X's and O's. And again, I get it. That can be extremely hard as a coach because you have the pressure to win. Everyone can say, most high school coaches don't have to win because they can't fill the positions if they fire them. But that's I don't know that that's entirely true, but even if it was, I mean, who wants to feel that way all the time that they're not producing success? And I was just reading a story of a local softball coach who turned a program around that was doing really, really bad. They've become successful, but they opened up the position and he's allowed to reapply for that softball position. But basically, they fired him. And a lot of it was, I don't want to put it on the parents, but there was a lot of involvement, administration involvement, community parents, because they didn't like his approach. And while it may have been rough, I think the problem for him specifically was the messaging. When you're taking over a program that hasn't been successful and you make a lot of changes, people kind of get stuck in not being successful and they're kind of okay with it. There are times that players have gone through series and seasons where they're not winning and they just become used to it. And the minute you try to change that or turn it around, it can ruffle some feathers. And I think that was probably the problem here, that the way it was presented and the way he interacted was not the best way. Now, I'm not putting that on the coach. I mean, some of it will be, but I think it's because we haven't prepped and worked on what it's like to get there. How do we teach players to be competitive? That's the other thing that we see every time we see travel club tryouts or elite teams forming, or even at the college ranks. One of the things the coach said, can you come in and be competitive? Are you comfortable being competitive and fighting for your spot? And the player, of course, is going to say, yes, I'm competitive. That's why I'm trying out for your elite team. But how do we teach them to be competitive? We just believe that it's going to be this inherent thing where because they're playing sports or because they're a top performer on their instrument and going to county bands and elite things, that they're going to learn to compete. But that's not always the case. Sometimes players get into positions where they're never challenged because they're really good and there's no one else to challenge them. And then they get in a situation where they're actually competing and they felt like they were ready to compete because they've been competing as a team at a high level, but they haven't learned how to individually compete. They haven't learned how to push themselves, let alone fight for their spot or fight for playing time. And we just expect them to because all this, they're at this high level and they should have been exposed to it by now, but they aren't always. I think sometimes we make too much assumptions on that. And how this kind of goes back to this lesson of resolutely train yourself to attain peace is we need to train what we expect. We need to stop saying, well, they should be coming in shape. They should be coming in and competing. They should be coming in and being able to handle that pressure. And the fact is, it isn't a matter of should they. It's a matter of what do we expect. And our expectations are often way too high. So we need to train ourselves to get to that level, to get to that piece of, okay, this is what we need, and this is what I stand for, and this is how we're going to. Every year I personally review my coaching philosophies, and I've had the same core values and the philosophy for a while. But this year, there's probably going to be the most significant changes I've made to my philosophy to attack this piece right now. Is I think I go in with too high of expectations, and that comes back to be a problem. You fall short in playoffs, or you miss that winning record, and you return most of your team. So of course your expectations are, well, I'm returning that whole team, so we should do better. The problem is that's not always the case, because it could be the same problems that jammed you up this year are going to be back. And just because a team has been together for another year doesn't mean those problems are magically going to disappear. And then as a coach, you start to get frustrated because those problems keep popping up. And it's really because we haven't trained ourselves to find those answers. So my goal for you as a coach or an educator this week is to really explore your methodology. How are you communicating? How do you give feedback? How do you present competition in your arena, whatever it is, whether it's sports or performance or in the classroom? And look at how you have trained. How much effort and time have you put on to be a better educator, to be a better carrier of the message that you want? Or are you assuming that those players have been exposed to something like that and it should just be boom, right in there with it? So again, lesson 21, Buddha and the Coach, resolutely train yourself to attain peace. And again, I'm taking it in this message of, to attain peace, we have to attain how we are teaching. To get that peace, we need to learn how to give feedback, how to give instruction, how to get the most out of our teams. Stop putting it on just the players to do it. And let's start to look at how we're delivering it and how we're guiding them. Because I believe that we do not spend enough time learning to be coaches or learning to be teachers. We spend too much time on learning what we are teaching. And I'll just close with this final thought. I know that people will go back and watch this at a different time, but for context, this episode is being recorded January 2 of 2023. And one of the things that I'm going into this year in everything I do is I'm going to stop focusing on becoming and focus on being. I felt like I focused so much on working and getting better and becoming a better teacher and becoming an educator that I've never actually stopped and put it in place to do it. So to be a better coach, I'm actually going to start to incorporate all the studies and everything that I've been learning. Instead of just trying to acquire the knowledge, I need to start using. I think that's what we need to do here. We need to start using the knowledge that we acquire as coaches. Going to coaches' clinics, reading all the books, and working on culture are all great. But we have to start putting it into place. We have to start to look how we put it into place. Stop worrying about the culture that you want to create and start looking at how are you actually going to create that culture? What are the steps to create that? And that's what's going to help you obtain. Because even if things just organically happen, you might still have conflict in you because you weren't part of the process. And for me, that's what it's all about. We want to be part of the process. But we need to learn how to train ourselves to be that. All right. That is the lesson for this episode, lesson 21, Buddha and the Coach. Resolutely train yourself to attain peace. Peace, much love, don't suck, and moving forward, a new hashtag, one day one. Is today one day, or is today going to be day one of something? The choice is yours. See you on the next episode of Buddha and the Coach. I'm Dan Mickle.